The ticket machine at Bay 14 had been humming for 4 months, and Nancy had stopped hearing it sometime in the 6th week. She heard almost nothing now that wasn't the scratch of a pen on a form or the beep of a scanner, and she had learned to categorize the beeps, the correct one, the uncertain one, and the one that meant the scanner had opinions. She was 22. She had been good at this job from the 2nd week, which her supervisor had communicated with the particular surprise of someone who expected less and received more. And Nancy had decided to keep being good at it regardless of whether anyone expected it. Queue number 34 came out of the machine with a crisp click. She set it in the tray. The arrival corridor camera fed to a small monitor at the left of her desk, and she checked it between forms the way she checked everything quickly, systematically, cataloging. The ship docking at the far end was not a standard ship. It was the kind of vessel that communicated its own significance through length and geometry alone. A dark metallic hull with a configuration of running lights along the upper ridge that suggested the designer had wanted it to be recognized from a distance. She turned back to the transit form she was cross-referencing and continued writing. She registered the height first when he came through the corridor. Then the quality of movement unhurried, the kind of pace that comes not from ease but from the absolute expectation that nothing will require adjustment. He was 6.5 feet of warm burnished gold skin and silver white hair, and a midnight blue floor-length coat with pale gold clasps that caught the fluorescent strips and made something of them. 2 small, smooth ivory horns curved backward from above his temples, clean and natural as bone. His eyes were vivid crimson. Along each cheekbone, iridescent rose-gold markings caught the light in quiet flashes. He walked through the arrival corridor the way water moves through a space it considers its own. Behind him, Chancellor Arius moved with the contained efficiency of someone managing more variables than the room could see. Rose-violet skin, cobalt indigo hair falling straight to her collarbones, large silver-gold eyes already reading the room in pieces. Partition Q Customs Officer Q number tray. The pale silver-rose scales along her temples shimmered faintly. She had a diplomatic satchel in her left hand and the expression of a professional who has learned that preparation is the only thing she can control. Nancy slid queue number 34 under the glass. Number 34, 3 visitors ahead of you. Waiting area to your left. The prince looked at the number, then at her, then back at the number, with the particular attention of someone encountering something that does not fit any category they have prepared for. I am Prince Caelith, he said. His voice was low and precise, trained to carry. Of the Vaelori Dominion. I have a priority diplomatic override chip. He set it on the counter with a clean click. It supersedes standard queue protocol. Nancy picked it up and placed it in the scanner. The scanner beeped the opinion beep, the one that meant it had decided, and produced a red light. She removed the chip, replaced it. Another beep. She unplugged the scanner, plugged it back in. It beeped before the chip was reinserted, which was new behavior and not an improvement. She set the chip on the counter. The scanner isn't reading it, she said. I'll need to process you manually. If you'd like to take a seat. I don't require a seat. He placed both hands flat on the partition counter. The gold arm cuff caught the fluorescent light. What I require is entry authorization, today, in the next 4 hours, to be precise, before the provisional treaty window expires. I understand. She was already reaching for the form drawer. I'll process you as quickly as I can. Are you the senior officer on this shift? She looked up. I am the only officer on this shift, she said. Standard staffing for a neutral transit bay. He looked at her. The crimson eyes moved across her, the gold-framed glasses, the slightly crooked ponytail, the station badge on her lapel with the brief, comprehensive scan of someone assessing an obstacle rather than meeting a person. Then he looked past her, to the processing room door behind her, to the filing system beside it, to the form dispenser that had just jammed on the 3rd sheet and required the sideways tap of her heel to produce it. You? He said. And there was nothing cruel intended in it, which was almost worse than cruelty, are the mechanism by which the Vaelori Dominion enters the Meridian Corridor. He said it the way someone says something they find genuinely absurd, not to wound, simply to register the absurdity aloud. A girl with a stamp. The waiting area was quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when something crosses a line. The unnamed aliens in the 6 chairs were still. One of them, tall, dark-featured, Q number, balanced on one knee, had stopped moving entirely. Arius had gone very still beside the prince. Her temple scales were matte, fully matte, every trace of iridescence gone, which Nancy did not know how to read yet but would later understand was the Vaeloran equivalent of closing your eyes against something you cannot stop. Nancy had her pen in her hand. She was holding it the way you hold something you've been holding for a while and suddenly become aware of. She looked at him over her glasses. The words had landed. She was 22 and 4 months into her first posting, and they had landed the way things land on people who are not yet armored against them, which is to say completely, in the chest, in the specific place where professional composure and actual personhood overlap. She felt it. Her face did not perform it, because she had enough training for that. But she felt it. "I'll call your number when I'm ready," she said. Her voice was even. She looked back down at the form. The processing room took 1 hour and 40 minutes. 12 pages. Every field. Arius delivered the prior approval documentation through the door slot with the quiet efficiency of someone who has prepared against every version of failure. Caelith sat in the plastic chair that expressed ongoing structural distress about his dimensions and answered every question in the controlled level voice of someone who considered the conversation beneath them and was being careful not to say so again. Nancy wrote everything down. She was thorough. She was always thorough. Page 12 was the last page. The authorization field. The stamp, the signature, the date. She completed the final field. She picked up the ink stamp. She looked at the form. She looked at the stamp. She looked at page 12 with the clean white authorization field waiting. She put the stamp in her desk drawer and locked it. "I need to verify something in the base system," she said. "I'll call you when I'm ready to complete the authorization." Caelith's cheekbone markings went flat. Verify what? Something in the base system. She picked up the 12-page form in her clipboard and stood up. "It won't take long." She walked out of the processing room and back to Bay 14 and sat down at her desk. And the form was in front of her and the locked drawer was in front of her. And she sat with both for a while. She was not going to let the window lapse. She had known that from the beginning, from before the drawer, before the lock. She was not built for that kind of vengeance, and she knew it. But she was not going to stamp the form in the immediate aftermath of being called a girl with a stamp either, as though the words had fallen into a room that contained no one to receive them. She was going to sit here for a while. She was going to be a person who had been called something in front of a room, and she was going to let that be a real thing that had happened. And then she was going to decide what happened next. She pulled out her notepad and wrote, in the margin, in her own handwriting, "Visitor stated, you are the mechanism by which the Vaelori Dominion enters the Meridian Corridor. A girl with a stamp." She dated it, signed it. The drawer stayed locked. 40 minutes later, the external dock monitor on Nancy's left screen, the one she checked between forms, showed something it had not shown before. A fleet. Not one ship, not two. 6 vessels arranged in the holding formation outside the station's outer range. Dark and enormous and very, very still in the way that things are still when they are waiting for instruction. She did not know enough about Vaelori military configuration to read their stillness precisely. She knew enough about stillness in general. She looked at the dock monitor for a long moment. Then she looked at her locked drawer. Then she looked at the dock monitor again. Her internal calculation, which had been moving in one direction since she locked the drawer, adjusted. The door to Bay 14 opened. Arius stood in the frame. She had never come to the bay side before, only to the processing room, only the door slot, only the 4-fingered hand with the documentation. Here she was, 5.5 feet of rose-violet composure, with cobalt indigo hair and silver gold eyes, and temple scales that were doing the uneven shimmer of someone managing something at the outer edge of their professional capacity. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her and stood in front of the desk with her hands at her sides and the diplomatic satchel over her left forearm. "Nancy," she said. Her voice was careful, precise in the way that voices are precise when the speaker has rehearsed and discarded several versions of the same sentence. "The provisional window has 1 hour and 2 minutes remaining." She paused. "You have the form. You have the stamp." Another pause. "I am not here to pressure you. I am here because—" She stopped again, visibly selecting. "Because I was in the waiting area, and I heard what was said. And I would like you to know that what was said was not— It was not a position the Vaelori Dominion holds. It was not diplomatic language. It was not—" Her temple scales flickered. "It was wrong." Nancy looked at her. "I know," Nancy said. Then Arius stopped. Her silver gold eyes held on Nancy's face with the focused attention of someone trying to read something they cannot quite see. "Then why?" "Because I needed a few minutes." Nancy said. To be a person who that happened to. She looked at the locked drawer. I'm not going to let the window lapse. I was never going to let the window lapse. She looked back at Arius. But I needed a few minutes first. Arius was quiet for a moment. Her temple scales stilled both sides, even the genuine stillness of someone who has understood something fully. He doesn't know that, she said. That you were never going to let it lapse. No, Nancy said. He doesn't. He thinks. Arius looked at the locked drawer with the expression of someone watching a calculation complete itself. He thinks, you're deciding. Yes. And he's been in the processing room for 40 minutes thinking that. Yes. A silence. The fleet, Nancy said, gesturing to the dock monitor. Arius looked at the screen. Her temple scales flickered. He called them, before he understood the situation fully. He called them immediately, which, she stopped. They will not act. They are standing by. I know they won't act. Nancy looked at the monitor. 6 enormous ships, very still. But he called them before he understood the situation. That's, she considered. That's the Empire showing me how large its fear is while trying not to call it fear. Arius said nothing. Her temple scales were very still. Nancy looked at the locked drawer. Where is he? She said. He was in the processing room where she had left him. Arius had said this simply in the processing room and then added, after a pause that carried the specific weight of something she considered relevant. He has not asked anyone to do anything. He has not contacted the fleet again. He has been sitting there since you left. Nancy had nodded. She had taken her clipboard and her locked drawer key, and she had walked back through the door, marked Customs Personnel Only, and down the short corridor with the overhead strip that buzzed when you walked past it, and stopped outside the processing room door. She could see him through the narrow, reinforced glass panel in the door. He was sitting in the plastic chair, the one that had been complaining about him since the beginning, with his elbows on his knees, and his silver-white hair fallen forward on both sides of his face, and his large hands open and loose between his knees. His midnight blue coat was still immaculate. The ivory horns caught the flat white ceiling light along their curve. His cheekbone markings were flat, fully matte, no iridescence, and his crimson eyes were on the floor approximately 2 feet in front of the chair. He was not managing anything. There was nothing to manage. He was just sitting. Nancy looked at him through the glass for a moment. This prince in a plastic chair, in a white-lit box, with a laminated Remain Calm sign on the wall, and then she pushed the door open and went in. He looked up. His crimson eyes found her immediately. His posture did not change. He did not straighten, did not reassemble, did not reach for the composure she had watched him maintain throughout the entire 12-page form. He simply looked at her, and she understood from the looking that he had been sitting in this room for 40 minutes with the specific understanding that he did not currently have the right to be anything other than what he was. She sat down across from him at the wobbly table. She set the clipboard down. She put the key on the table between them. She folded her hands on top of the clipboard and looked at him over her gold-framed glasses. The fleet, she said. I called them before I understood what was happening. His voice was level, but it had lost the trained placement, the quality that filled rooms and communicated authority. It was just a voice now. I called them because it was the first response I have to things that threaten the corridor claim. It was automatic. He looked at the key on the table. They won't move without my direct order. I know they won't move. She looked at him. That's not why I'm mentioning it. He met her eyes. You were frightened, she said. Not as an accusation, simply as a fact being named. Something moved across his face through the flat markings, through the controlled jaw, through the crimson eyes, something that was not anger and not shame, but was in the territory between them where honest people live when they have been accurately seen. Yes, he said. 6 ships, standing by outside a neutral station because a customs officer locked her drawer. She let that sit for a moment. That is how large it got for you. He did not look away. That was something. She noted it. What I said in the waiting area, he began. I know what you said. I want to. I wrote it down, she said. I know exactly what you said. She looked at him steadily. What I want to know is whether you understand what you actually said, not the diplomatic version, not what it means in terms of the treaty claim or the formal record. She paused. What you actually said. The processing room was very quiet. The ceiling light hummed. The table held its slight wobble in reserve. Caelith looked at his open hands between his knees. He looked at them for a long moment the way someone looks at something they are responsible for. I looked at you, he said slowly, and I decided what ye could cover before I looked at you. He did not phrase it as an apology. He phrased it as the thing itself, which was more honest than an apology. I looked at the partition and the scanner and the form in your hand, and I made a category, and I put you in it. And I said it out loud because I didn't think he started again. Because I didn't think it would matter to you. Because the category I put you in was the kind that things don't matter to. He looked up. The crimson eyes held on her face with the full weight of someone who has followed a thought somewhere uncomfortable and decided to stay there. That was the wrong thing, not the wrong words. The wrong thing underneath the words. Nancy looked at him. Outside, through the processing room's narrow high window, the station's exterior lights were visible amber and white in the dark, and beyond them, if you knew where to look, the faint shape of 6 ships sitting very still in holding formation, enormous and present and entirely powerless over whatever happened in this small white room. 51 minutes, she said. He looked at the key on the table. Nancy. His voice had come down to its actual register. Not the trained room-filling quality, not the careful level control of the last 2 hours. Just a voice, just a person, please. The words sat in the fluorescent-lit room between them. Please. 1 syllable. No protocol attached to it. No prostration, no formal address, no empire language wrapped around it to give it structure and distance. Just the word, plain and direct, from a prince in a complaining plastic chair to a girl with a stamp. Nancy looked at him for a long moment. She was 22 and 4 months into her first posting, and she had been called furniture in a waiting room, and she had locked her drawer, and she had sat at her desk, and she had watched a fleet appear on her dock monitor, and she had understood from the fleet, from its enormous silent presence outside the station, how completely the calculation had inverted, from the moment he had said what he had said, to the moment he was sitting across from her, saying please in a voice with nothing managed about it. She picked up the key. She stood. She walked out of the processing room without saying anything, leaving him at the table, and went to Bay 14 and unlocked the drawer. She took out the stamp. She took out the 12-page form. She brought them back to the processing room and sat back down and set the stamp on the table and the form in front of her and picked up her pen. Caelith watched her. She opened to page 12. She pressed the stamp to the ink pad. She pressed it to the authorization field, clean, even, centered. She signed her name beneath it in clear, readable script. She wrote the date. She turned the form to face him. Your copy goes through the diplomatic channel, she said. I'll file the original. Your corridor access is renewed. She slid the form across the wobbling table. The provisional entry is now permanent. The treaty claim is confirmed. Your fleet can stand down. He picked up the form. He looked at the stamp, clean and official on page 12, her signature beneath it. He looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something that cost more than its physical dimensions suggest. The fleet, he said. He was already reaching for his communicator. Whenever you're ready, she said. He sent the stand-down order in 4 words and set the communicator on the table and looked at Nancy with his flat cheekbone markings and his crimson eyes that had the quality of someone deciding to see something clearly. Why? He said. Not the full question, just the first word of it, but the rest was present. Because I was never going to let the window lapse. She straightened the clipboard. I told you, I needed a few minutes. She looked at him over her glasses. You needed them too. You just didn't know that yet. He was quiet for a moment. The record, he said. The visitor feedback file. Stays, she said. I'm adding an amendment. Same as I would for any formal correction. Visitor acknowledged statement and retracted. Date, time, my signature. She had already turned to her notepad and was writing. The record should be accurate in both directions. She finished the amendment. She signed it. She turned the clipboard to face him. He looked at his own words in her handwriting, a girl with a stamp, and the amendment beneath them. She had written it cleanly and briefly, exactly as she had described. No editorial, no weight added. Just the fact of what happened next, documented. He initialed it. The pen was still labeled Meridian Station Property, Do Not Remove. He set it down. I will need to come through Bay 14 again, he said. The treaty renewal is annual. Queue numbers are in the machine, she said, to your left when you enter. Something moved in his crimson eyes, not quite what she would have called a smile, because she did not yet know enough about Vaelori faces to read that precisely. But the cheekbone markings caught the light for the first time since the waiting area, a warm, quiet flash of rose gold iridescence, brief and real. He stood, 6'5" of Crown Prince in a room designed for someone significantly shorter, the ivory horns almost reaching the ceiling light, the midnight blue coat settling into its floor-length authority. He held the stamped form in his right hand. He did not bow. The Vaelori prostration was a formal protocol, and this was not a formal moment. This was a processing room with a wobbly table and a remain calm sign and a stamp that had been in a locked drawer for 50 minutes. He inclined his head, 1 degree, direct and deliberate, the specific angle of someone choosing, without protocol, to acknowledge someone. Then he left. The break room was empty, except for Nancy's green Tupperware on the round table and the vending machine against the left wall, which had developed a small amber light on its panel sometime during the afternoon and had not resolved it. The fluorescent strip above the table hummed with the flat contentment of institutional lighting everywhere. Nancy sat down. She put the clipboard on the table. She put the key next to it. She opened her Tupperware. Her screen had 4 new messages. The first was the scanner replacement confirmation for Bay 14, finally, after 4 calibrations. The second was the shift report reminder, which she would complete before she left. The third was from Arius, sent 6 minutes ago, which contained 1 line. Thank you. No title, no diplomatic language, just the 2 words and her name below them. Nancy read it twice. She thought about Arius in the waiting area this morning, temple scales completely matte, hands still, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. She thought about Arius coming to the bay desk, selecting her words so carefully, saying it was wrong in the voice of someone who meant it personally and not procedurally. She typed back, "You're welcome," sent it. The 4th message was from Station Administration, time-stamped 11 minutes ago, subject line in full capitals. Diplomatic liaison appointment, immediate effect mandatory review requested. She opened it. She read the title of the new position, Interstellar Diplomatic Liaison, Meridian Neutral Station, and the salary, and the effective date, which was today, and the note from Station Chief that said the appointment had come with a formal commendation from the Vaelori Dominion's diplomatic office, transmitted 40 minutes ago, which was approximately when Arius had been standing in front of her desk with her hands at her sides. She read the office location, Level 4, overlooking the docking arms. She took her glasses off. She cleaned them on her sleeve. She put them back on and looked at the dock monitor built into the break room's right wall, the external view, the same feed as Bay 14, and saw the holding formation dissolving. 6 enormous ships, very slowly, moving out of configuration and back into their departure vectors, the fleet standing down, dark and vast and retreating, ship by ship back into the dark beyond the station's outer range. She watched until the last one had gone. Then she looked at the screen and typed her reply to Station Administration. "Does the new office have a better chair?" She sent it. She closed the screen. She picked up her Tupperware. Outside the break room window, through the corridor glass and the station's amber docking lights, the space where the fleet had been was empty and ordinary and completely still, the way space always looks after something enormous has just been in it and decided to leave. The vending machine's amber light went out. Decision reached. Whatever it had been calculating about the imperial currency token it had accepted that morning, it had apparently resolved it, or given up, or arrived at the conclusion that some transactions simply do not process the way they were intended to, and the only reasonable response is to turn the light off and move on. Nancy finished her lunch. Station Administration replied at 5 past the hour. 1 line, "The chair on level 4 is significantly better." She read it. She put her Tupperware lid back on. She picked up her clipboard and her pen still in her jacket pocket. As always, still labeled Meridian Station Property, Do Not Remove. And she walked back to Bay 14 for the last 40 minutes of her shift, passing the ticket machine on her way in, which hummed once in its self-satisfied way, and which she still, after 4 months, had absolutely no feelings about whatsoever. The Level 4 office had a window. Nancy had not had a window at Bay 14. She had had a dock monitor, a screen that showed her the external view in a rectangle of cold blue light, and she had learned to read it the way she read forms, systematically and without sentiment. The Level 4 window was different. It was actual glass, actual dark, actual stars in their actual positions over the docking arms, and she stood in front of it on her first morning in the new office and looked at the space where the fleet had been and thought about the distance between a locked drawer and 6 enormous ships standing down. The chair was significantly better. She had noted this immediately and had not mentioned it to anyone. The amendment to the visitor feedback record sat in station files under her signature. His words, her words, both dated, both accurate. She had not looked at it again. It did not need looking at. It was simply there. The way true things are simply there, neither growing nor diminishing, available to anyone who needed the record to be complete. Arias sent a formal transmission 3 days after the visit. It was 2 paragraphs of diplomatic language and 1 sentence at the end that was not diplomatic language at all. I have advised His Highness to study the administrative systems of neutral stations before his next visit. He found this suggestion reasonable. Nancy read that last sentence twice and filed the transmission and allowed herself, alone in the Level 4 office with its actual window, one small private smile. The ticket machine at Bay 14 still hummed between dispensings. She could not hear it from Level 4. She did not miss it. She sat down in the significantly better chair and opened the first file of the day and began, as she always had, at the top of page 1.